Well, I'll be hornswoggled. In all my 72 years on this green earth, I never thought I'd see the day when a blind dog would save more lives than our entire volunteer fire department. But that's exactly what happened on the morning Pine Ridge caught fire, and I was the only soul who witnessed the whole blessed thing. The evacuation siren started wailing at 5:47 a.m., jolting me from the first decent sleep I'd had in months. My arthritis was acting up. Something fierce happens every time the weather's fixing to change, and I could barely get my old bones out of bed. Through my kitchen window at Autumn Creek Retirement Community, I could see orange flames licking the ridgeline like the devil's own tongue. 48 hours! The loudspeaker crackled from the emergency vehicle racing down Maple Street. All residents of Autumn Creek have 48 hours to evacuate. This is not a drill. 48 hours. Land sakes alive. Most of us old-timers needed that long just to remember where we put our teeth, let alone pack up a lifetime of memories and skedaddle. I was standing there in my housecoat, watching black smoke roll down the mountain like storm clouds, when I heard the screaming. 3 children, couldn't have been older than 6 or 7, were running blind through the smoke that had suddenly shifted toward the playground. Little ones from the daycare center that bordered our retirement community. The smoke was so thick I could barely make out their shapes, but I could hear them crying, calling for their teacher, completely lost and heading straight toward the fire line. That's when I saw him. A German shepherd, big as life and twice as determined, moving through that smoke like he had eyes in the back of his head. Except he didn't have any eyes worth speaking of. Both were clouded over white as winter frost. This dog was stone blind, yet he was weaving between those panicked children with the precision of a Swiss watch, gently taking hold of their jacket sleeves with his teeth and guiding them toward safety. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe the smoke was playing tricks on me. "Mercy me," I whispered, gripping my kitchen counter so hard my knuckles went white. The dog, I'd learn later his name was Ranger, methodically gathered those 3 little ones, leading them in a perfect line away from the advancing flames. He'd take a few steps, stop, turn his massive head to make sure they were all still with him, then continue on, when the smallest child, a little girl with pigtails, stumbled and fell. That dog circled back, lay down beside her until she stopped crying, then coaxed her back to her feet. "Well, if that don't beat all," I muttered, watching this miracle unfold through the haze. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. I recognized that dog. 3 years ago, he'd belonged to Harrison Blackstone, the richest man in Pine Ridge County. Harry lived in that fancy mansion up on Sycamore Hill, the one with more bedrooms than a boarding house and a garage bigger than most folks' entire homes. I'd seen Harry walking this very same German shepherd through town, back when the dog could see, and Harry treated him like a prized possession. Now here was that same dog, blind as a bat and abandoned, saving children while the fire department was still suiting up. The whole rescue took maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. When Ranger finally delivered those 3 children to the evacuation staging area near the community center, he didn't stick around for praise or petting. He just melted back into the smoke like a ghost, leaving those kids crying for their parents and the volunteer firefighters scratching their heads, wondering how 3 lost children had suddenly appeared at the safety zone. I was the only one who saw the whole thing from start to finish. "Abigail Thompson, you old fool," I said to myself. "Who's going to believe a story like that?" But I knew what I'd seen, and I've never been one to keep my mouth shut when something important was staring me in the face. That dog was special, not in some fairy tale way, but in the way that only comes from good training and an even better heart. Question was, why had Harry Blackstone thrown away something so valuable, and where had Ranger been hiding all this time? The evacuation alarm wailed again, reminding me that I had bigger fish to fry than solving dog mysteries. I had 2 days to pack up my life and find somewhere safe to wait out this fire. But as I shuffled toward my bedroom to start throwing clothes in a suitcase, I couldn't shake the image of that blind dog moving with such purpose, such confidence, through the chaos. Something wasn't right about any of this. The fire, the timing, Harry Blackstone's missing dog turning up at just the right moment to play hero. My grandmother always said that when too many coincidences line up in a row, somebody's pulling the strings behind the curtain. And honey, I intended to find out who. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. By 7 that morning, I'd managed to coax Ranger out of the smoke and into my little apartment. Poor thing was shaking like a leaf in a windstorm. His beautiful coat singed in patches and his paws cut up from running through debris. When I knelt down to examine him closer, what I saw made my heart break clean in two. Scars. Old ones, crisscrossing his muzzle like a road map of cruelty. His ears were torn in places where they'd been grabbed too roughly, and when I ran my fingers along his ribs, I could feel where bones had been broken and healed crooked. This wasn't just neglect, this was deliberate, systematic abuse that had gone on for years. "Oh, sweet boy," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. "What did that monster do to you?" Ranger pressed his massive head against my shoulder with such desperate gratitude that I nearly started crying right there on my kitchen floor. When I offered him a bowl of water, he drank like he hadn't seen liquid in days, but he kept his clouded eyes fixed in my direction, like he was afraid I might disappear if he looked away. That's when Clayton Morrison showed up at my door. Clay's been Pine Ridge's lead firefighter for going on 15 years now, and he's got the kind of steady presence that makes folks feel safer just having him around. But this morning, he looked like he'd been rode hard and put away wet, his face streaked with soot and his uniform torn in 3 places. "Morning, Mrs. Thompson," he said, tipping his helmet. "We're doing wellness checks on all the Autumn Creek residents. You holding up okay?" "Fine as frog's hair," I replied, though we both knew that was a stretch. "Clay, I need to tell you something about how those children got to safety this morning." His eyebrows shot up. "You saw what happened. We've been trying to piece that together. 3 kids just appeared at the staging area like they'd been beamed down from heaven." I told him the whole story, every detail about Ranger's rescue operation. Clay listened politely, nodding in all the right places, but I could see the skepticism growing in his eyes with every word. By the time I finished, he was wearing that careful expression people use when they think you've gone soft in the head. "Mrs. Thompson," he said gently, "that's quite a story. But a blind dog navigating through smoke and fire. Are you sure you didn't maybe see one of our search and rescue teams? Clayton Morrison, I may be old as Methuselah, but my eyes work just fine." I snapped. "That dog saved those children, and I've got him right here to prove it." When Clay saw Ranger cowering behind my kitchen table, his attitude shifted slightly. "Well, I'll be..." That is one beat-up animal. Where'd he come from? Used to belong to Harry Blackstone up on Sycamore Hill. Haven't seen him around town in years, but I'd recognize that dog anywhere. Something flickered across Clay's face when I mentioned Harry's name, but he covered it quick. Harrison Blackstone's been real generous with the fire department lately. Just donated a new truck last month. That right there told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation was going to go. Harry Blackstone had money, influence, and the kind of reputation that made people look the other way when inconvenient questions started getting asked. I was just a retired nurse living on Social Security, and my word against his wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. "You should probably get that dog to the vet clinic," Clay said, backing toward my door. "And Mrs. Thompson, maybe it's best not to spread stories that might cause panic. Folks are scared enough as it is." After he left, I sat on my kitchen floor with Ranger and tried not to feel like I was losing my mind. Outside my window, I could see my neighbors from the retirement community loading their cars with suitcases and photo albums, their faces tight with worry. Most of them were dealing with their own problems, medications to organize, oxygen tanks to transport, family members to contact. The last thing they needed was crazy old Abby Thompson spinning tales about hero dogs. But I knew what I'd seen. Around noon, Ranger started acting strange again. He'd been resting peacefully beside my recliner, but suddenly his head shot up and he began pacing to the window, whining low in his throat. I followed his gaze and saw a black Mercedes sedan cruising slowly down Maple Street. Harry Blackstone sat behind the wheel, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the chaos around us. He was wearing a crisp white shirt and tie, like he was heading to a business meeting instead of fleeing a wildfire. But what caught my attention was the way he kept checking the sidewalks and yards, his eyes scanning back and forth like he was looking for something, or someone. The moment Ranger caught sight of that car, he transformed into a different animal entirely. The confident, protective dog who'd saved those children disappeared, replaced by a trembling, terrified creature who pressed himself against the wall and tried to make himself invisible. His breathing became rapid and shallow, and a low whimper escaped his throat, the sound of an animal reliving its worst nightmares. "That's him, isn't it?" I whispered. "That's the man who hurt you." Harry's Mercedes slowed to a crawl as it passed my building, and I could swear he was looking directly at my window. When his gaze swept across my apartment, I ducked below the sill, my heart hammering like a woodpecker on a tin roof. There was something in his expression that made my blood run cold, a calculating, predatory look that had nothing to do with wildfire evacuations. After the car disappeared around the corner, I helped Ranger settle down with some gentle words and careful petting. But my mind was racing. If Harry had abandoned this dog years ago, why was he cruising through the retirement community now? And why did seeing his former pet seem to matter so much? The evacuation sirens wailed again, reminding everyone that we had less than 40 hours to clear out. Through my window, I could see the orange glow on the horizon growing brighter, and the smell of smoke was getting stronger by the minute. Most sensible folks would be focused on packing their belongings and finding safe shelter. But I kept thinking about those 3 children, and the way Ranger had moved through that smoke with such purpose. Guide dogs are trained to disobey commands that would put their handlers in danger. It's called intelligent disobedience. And it's the most important thing they learn. What if Ranger had been trained for something else entirely? What if his refusal to obey Harry Blackstone hadn't been defiance, but protection? "That man's slicker than a whistle," I told Ranger, scratching behind his torn ears. "But old eyes see what young ones miss, and this old gal's been around long enough to smell trouble coming." Outside, the wind was picking up, pushing the fire closer to town. We were running out of time, but I had a feeling that Ranger and I were the only ones who could see the real danger heading our way. And it wasn't just the wildfire. It wasn't. The memory hit me like a slap across the face while I was digging through my photo albums, trying to decide what to pack for the evacuation. There it was, a picture from 3 summers ago. My granddaughter Emma laughing as she threw a tennis ball for a young German shepherd in Harry Blackstone's backyard. Emma, my sweet girl. The light of my life snuffed out too soon. I set the photograph on my kitchen table with trembling fingers, and suddenly I was right back there on that terrible day in July, reliving every moment I'd tried so hard to forget. Emma was 7 years old then, smart as a whip and fearless as her grandmother. She'd been staying with me for the summer while her parents worked. My daughter Sarah was pulling double shifts at the hospital in Billings, and Emma's daddy was deployed overseas with the National Guard. That little girl had wrapped herself around my heart from the moment she could walk, and having her all to myself for those precious months felt like winning the lottery. "Grandma Abby," she'd said that morning, tugging on my sleeve while I made pancakes, "can we go see the doggy today? Please." The doggy was Ranger, though he was called something else back then, Baron. I think Harry had named him. Emma had spotted him during one of our walks past the Blackstone estate, and she'd been smitten from the first moment she saw his intelligent brown eyes and wagging tail. Harry, surprisingly, had been gracious about letting her visit, even inviting us into his backyard to watch him put the dog through training exercises. "That's a special kind of dog," Harry had explained to Emma, his voice smooth as honey. "He's being trained to help people who can't see. Very important work." Emma had clapped her hands together. "Like a superhero dog. Exactly like that. Little one?" Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs, the way Ranger would flinch when Harry raised his voice, how the dog's tail would tuck between his legs whenever Harry reached for the training equipment, the careful way Ranger moved around his owner like he was walking on eggshells. But Emma saw none of that. She only saw a beautiful, intelligent animal who seemed to light up whenever she appeared. And Harry seemed charmed by her innocent enthusiasm, always making time for her visits, always patient with her endless questions about dog training and guide work. "Mr. Harry," Emma had asked one afternoon, "why does Baron look sad sometimes?" "Dogs don't feel sad like people do, sweetheart," Harry had replied. "He's just concentrating on his lessons." I remember thinking that was odd, because any fool could see that Ranger Baron was one of the most expressive animals I'd ever encountered. His emotions played across his face as clear as day, especially around Emma. When she was there, he seemed happier, more relaxed, like her presence gave him something to hope for. The day it happened, Emma had been extra excited because Harry had promised to show her some new tricks Ranger had learned. I'd been feeling poorly that morning. My blood pressure medication was making me dizzy, so I'd agreed to let her walk to the Blackstone place by herself. It was only 6 blocks, all through safe neighborhood streets, and Emma knew the way by heart. "I'll be back by lunch, Grandma," she'd called over her shoulder, skipping down my front steps with a bag of dog treats in her pocket. Tell Mom I'm teaching Barron to shake hands. That was the last time I saw my granddaughter alive. When she didn't come home by noon, I called Harry's house. No answer. By 2:00, I was pacing my kitchen floor, that sick feeling in my stomach getting stronger by the minute. Something wasn't right. Emma was responsible for her age, always punctual, always kept her promises. I called the police at 3:30. They found her body in Willow Creek, the little stream that ran behind Harry's property, just as the sun was setting. Drowned, they said. Must have slipped on the muddy bank while playing near the water. Tragic accident. These things happen with children and water. But I knew better. Emma was a strong swimmer. I'd taught her myself in the community pool. She respected water, understood its dangers. And that creek was barely knee-deep on a 7-year-old child. You'd have to work pretty hard to drown in Willow Creek, even if you were trying. When I brought up my concerns to Sheriff Matthews, he patted my shoulder with the same condescending gentleness Clay Morrison had shown me this morning. Mrs. Thompson, I know this is hard. Grief makes us look for someone to blame when sometimes there just isn't anyone. Your granddaughter's death was a terrible accident, but that's all it was. Did you talk to Harry Blackstone? I'd pressed. Did you ask him what happened during Emma's visit? Mr. Blackstone wasn't home when the incident occurred. He was in Helena on business. We verified that with his hotel. The little girl must have wandered onto his property later and fallen into the creek while playing. But that didn't make sense either. Emma wouldn't have gone back to Harry's place without permission, and she certainly wouldn't have played near water by herself. I'd drilled water safety into her head since she was old enough to understand words. The funeral was 3 days later. Harry Blackstone attended, dressed in an expensive black suit, carrying a wreath of white lilies that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He approached me at the graveside, his face arranged in an expression of appropriate sorrow. Mrs. Thompson, I'm so very sorry for your loss. Emma was a delightful child. Barron and I will miss her visits terribly. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. Not I'll miss her. Barron and I will miss her. Like the dog was equally responsible for the sentiment, like they were partners in something. Where's Barron? I'd asked, scanning the crowd of mourners. Emma would have wanted him here. Harry's expression flickered just for a second. I'm afraid Barron isn't feeling well. Dogs grieve too, you know. After that day, I never saw Ranger again. Harry stopped bringing him for walks through town. When I asked neighbors about the dog, they said Harry had mentioned getting rid of him, too much trouble, too aggressive, not suitable for guide work after all. But I knew the truth, even if I couldn't prove it. Something had happened at Harry Blackstone's house that day, something that involved Emma and that beautiful German shepherd. And whatever it was, it had ended with my granddaughter dead, and Ranger disappeared. Sitting in my kitchen now, with that same dog sleeping at my feet, blind, scarred, but alive, I felt the pieces of a horrible puzzle starting to click into place. Ranger hadn't been gotten rid of 3 years ago. He'd been tortured, blinded, and left to die. But somehow, he'd survived. And now, he was back, just as Pine Ridge was burning. I should have watched her closer. I whispered to the empty room, the same words I'd been repeating like a prayer for 3 years. I should have gone with her that day, Should have trusted my instincts about that man. Ranger lifted his massive head and looked in my direction with those clouded eyes, as if he could sense my pain. Slowly, carefully, he rose from his spot by the door and padded over to where I sat. He laid his head on my lap, the same gesture of comfort he'd offered Emma all those summers ago. "You remember her, don't you?" I asked, stroking his scarred fur. "You remember my Emma?" His tail gave the faintest wag, and I swear I could see recognition in those damaged eyes. This dog had loved my granddaughter, and I was beginning to suspect that his refusal to forget her might have cost him everything. Outside, the evacuation sirens wailed again, but I barely heard them. I was too busy remembering, too busy connecting dots that everyone else had dismissed as the ravings of a grief-stricken old woman. Harry Blackstone had killed my granddaughter. I was sure of it now, and somehow this brave, broken dog was going to help me prove it. The change in Ranger came around 4 o'clock that afternoon, when the evacuation countdown had dropped to 36 hours. I was in my bedroom, trying to decide which of my late husband's photographs to pack, when I heard the dog whining urgently from the kitchen. When I shuffled out to check on him, Ranger was standing by the back door, his nose pressed against the glass and his whole body vibrating with tension. His clouded eyes were fixed on something in the distance, and he was making a low rumbling sound in his throat, not quite a bark, but not quite a whine either. "What is it, boy?" I asked, following his gaze toward the woods behind our retirement community. That's when I saw the smoke. Not the distant orange glow from the main fire, but a thin gray plume rising from somewhere much closer. Someone was burning something in the forest, right there behind Autumn Creek, when every fire department in 3 counties had banned open flames. Ranger pawed at the door more insistently, and I made a decision that probably wasn't very smart for a 72-year-old woman with arthritis. I clipped a leash to his collar, though Lord knows he didn't need one, and let him lead me outside. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning pine, but Ranger moved through it like he had a built-in compass. We followed the maintenance trail that wound behind the retirement community, past the groundskeeper's shed and the old storm drain that collected runoff from the hillside. It was there, near a cluster of dead birch trees, that Ranger stopped and began digging. His paws worked frantically at the loose soil, and within minutes he'd uncovered the corner of something metallic, a box of some kind, wrapped in a heavy plastic tarp and buried maybe 18 inches down. When I helped him pull it free, I could see it was a fireproof document case, the expensive kind that rich folks use to protect their important papers. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," I muttered, brushing dirt off the latches. "What's Harry Blackstone's fancy lockbox doing buried in our woods?" Because it was Harry's, no doubt about it. His initials were engraved right there on the top. J. B. Harrison James Blackstone. My hands were shaking as I opened the case, partly from excitement and partly from the arthritis that always flared up when the weather turned. Inside were documents, photographs, and equipment that made my blood run cold. Road flares, the kind used to start controlled burns, maps of Pine Ridge County with specific areas circled in red ink, including the ridge where today's fire had started, insurance policies on dozens of properties throughout the county, all with Harrison Blackstone listed as the beneficiary, and photographs. Dear Lord, The photographs. Pictures of fires, dozens of them, dating back years. House fires, barn fires, forest fires. Each photo was labeled with a date and location, like trophies in some sick collection. I recognized some of the sites, the old Peterson farm that burned down 5 years ago, the Miller cabin that was destroyed in what they called a lightning strike, the warehouse fire on the east side of town that everyone assumed was caused by faulty wiring. All of them had been deliberately set. All of them had made Harry Blackstone richer. That son of a... I caught myself before finishing the curse, even though there was nobody around to hear it except Ranger. That man's been burning down half the county for insurance money. But the worst discovery was at the bottom of the case. A manila envelope marked contingency plans in Harry's neat handwriting. Inside were detailed maps of Pine Ridge with evacuation routes marked and timetables noted. Plans for starting fires during peak wildfire season, when natural causes would be assumed. Lists of properties that would be cleared for development once the existing structures were destroyed. This wasn't just arson for insurance fraud. This was a systematic plan to remake the entire county according to Harry Blackstone's vision, using wildfire as his weapon. And today's fire, the one threatening to destroy our whole community, was just the latest step in his scheme. "Clay Morrison needs to see this," I said to Ranger, carefully repacking the evidence. "Though I wonder if he'll believe it coming from crazy old Abby Thompson." That's when I heard the footsteps behind us. I wouldn't worry about Clay Morrison believing anything, Mrs. Thompson. He won't have the chance. I spun around as fast as my old bones would allow, clutching the document case to my chest. Harry Blackstone stood about 20 feet away, partially hidden by the smoke drifting through the trees. He was still wearing that crisp white shirt, but now it was smudged with soot, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. More importantly, he was holding a gun. "Now, I know what you're thinking," Harry said, his voice as smooth and reasonable as ever. "Here's poor old Mrs. Thompson, all alone in the woods with a dangerous man. But you see, that's not quite how this story is going to end." Ranger moved protectively in front of me, a low growl rumbling in his chest despite his blindness. When Harry saw the dog, his expression shifted to something uglier, a cold fury that transformed his handsome features into something reptilian. Well, look what crawled back from the dead. I should have made sure you stayed buried the first time, you worthless mutt." "You tried to kill him," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. 3 years ago, the same time you killed my Emma." Harry's laugh was like ice cracking. "Your granddaughter was an unfortunate necessity." The little brat saw something she shouldn't have seen. Children ask too many questions, don't they? Always poking their noses where they don't belong. The casual way he admitted to murdering Emma hit me like a physical blow. For 3 years, I'd carried the guilt of not protecting her, not seeing the danger, but hearing this monster speak about her death like it was a minor inconvenience made something fierce and protective roar to life inside my chest. "You killed a 7-year-old child because she saw you training your dog to commit arson," I said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "That's what guide dogs do, isn't it? They're trained to disobey commands that would cause harm. But you were trying to train Ranger to start fires on command, and he wouldn't do it. Intelligent disobedience. Harry spat. The most useless trait ever bred into an animal. I spent thousands on that dog, and he refused to perform the simplest tasks. Set a fire here. Carry accelerant there, basic commands that any properly trained animal should follow without question. So you beat him until he went blind, then left him to die in the woods. I should have put a bullet in his head and saved myself the trouble, but I was feeling sentimental that day. Harry's grip tightened on the gun. A mistake I won't repeat. The evacuation sirens wailed in the distance, reminding me that we had less than 36 hours before the fire reached Pine Ridge proper. But looking at Harry Blackstone's cold eyes, I realized that timeline might be optimistic for Ranger and me. Now, Mrs. Thompson, Harry continued, you're going to hand over that case, and then you and your four-legged friend are going to take a little walk deeper into the woods. I'm afraid the smoke got too thick, and you became disoriented. Very tragic. But these things happen during evacuations. I hugged the evidence tighter to my chest. Like hell I will. Harry's smile was colder than a Montana winter. Oh, I think you will, because if you don't, I'll make sure your death is a lot slower and more painful than it needs to be. The gun in Harry's hand wasn't the most terrifying thing about our situation. It was the look in his eyes, cold, calculating, and completely devoid of human feeling. I'd seen that expression once before, 3 years ago, when he'd stood at Emma's graveside pretending to grieve for a child he'd murdered. You know what I find fascinating about you, Mrs. Thompson, Harry said, taking a step closer. You've spent 3 years mourning that little girl, blaming yourself for not protecting her. But you never once considered the truth that she died trying to save this worthless animal. My heart stopped beating for a full second. What are you talking about? Your precious granddaughter saw me disciplining Baron in the backyard that day, training him properly, with the methods necessary to break his spirit and make him useful. She came running out of the house screaming about animal cruelty, trying to put herself between me and my property. Harry's smile was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen on a human face. She actually tried to untie him from the training post, 7 years old, and she thought she could rescue a 100-pound German shepherd from a grown man. Admirable, really, if not tragically stupid. The document case slipped from my numb fingers. Emma hadn't drowned by accident. She hadn't even been playing by the creek. She died trying to save Ranger from torture. So I had to make a choice, Harry continued, his voice as casual as if he were discussing the weather. Let a child ruin years of careful work or solve the problem permanently. Children have accidents near water all the time. Very believable, especially when there's no one around to contradict the story. But Ranger saw everything, I whispered, the pieces falling into place. That's why you tried to kill him too. The dog became unreliable after that. Wouldn't follow commands, wouldn't respond to training. Kept trying to lead people to where I'd buried the girl's backpack and shoes, the ones that would have shown she'd been at my house. Not playing alone by the creek. Harry's expression darkened. So I decided to eliminate the witness, beat him unconscious and left him in the woods to die. Should have worked. But apparently the beast is harder to kill than I anticipated. Ranger had gone rigid beside me, his clouded eyes fixed on Harry with an intensity that made my skin crawl. A low rumble was building in his chest, not quite a growl, but something deeper and more dangerous. The irony is delicious, Harry continued. Here you are. 3 years later, carrying evidence that could destroy me, with the one witness to your granddaughter's murder standing right beside you. It's almost poetic. That's when the second shock hit me like a lightning bolt. You didn't just kill Emma to cover up dog abuse, I said, my voice barely a whisper. You killed her because she saw you starting fires. That's what the training was really about. You were teaching Ranger to be your accomplice in arson. Harry's laugh was like breaking glass. Brilliant, isn't it? Who would suspect a blind guide dog of carrying accelerant to specific locations? Who would question a service animal moving freely through buildings, across property lines, into areas where humans might be noticed? I'd spent 2 years training him to deposit incendiary devices on command, to return to designated spots and dig up buried supplies. The scope of his plan was staggering, using a dog and animal bred to help and protect people as a weapon of destruction, teaching him to start fires that would kill families, destroy communities, wipe out generations of history and memories. But Emma caught you training him that day, I continued, my anger building with each word. She saw you forcing him to carry fire-starting equipment. She knew it was wrong, even if she didn't understand why. Smart little girl. Too smart for her own good. Harry shifted his grip on the gun. She kept asking questions I couldn't answer. Where did the fire start? Why was Baron carrying strange things in his mouth? Why did he look so scared when I gave him commands? My granddaughter had died protecting Ranger, just like she'd protected every stray cat and injured bird she'd ever found. Her loving, fearless heart had gotten her killed by a monster who saw compassion as weakness. And when you couldn't make Ranger cooperate anymore, you decided to eliminate both witnesses, I said, tears streaming down my face. A necessary business decision, though I must admit, seeing the dog alive after all this time is quite a surprise. I assumed the coyotes had finished what I started. But as Harry spoke, I noticed something that made my blood run even colder. In the distance, barely visible through the smoke, I could see orange flames dancing between the trees. The wildfire was moving faster than anyone had predicted, racing down the mountainside toward Pine Ridge with frightening speed. Harry, I said, my voice shaking, the fire's moving this way. We need to get back to town. He glanced over his shoulder at the approaching flames, then back at me with that same reptilian smile. Oh, I know exactly where the fire is, Mrs. Thompson. I've been monitoring its progress all day. You see, this little conversation of ours is happening right in its path. The truth hit me like a physical blow. You planned this. You knew I'd come out here if Ranger led me to the evidence. You've been watching us. I've been watching you since this morning, when you told that fool Morrison about the dog saving children. Did you really think I'd let you stumble around asking questions without keeping track of your investigation? Harry checked his watch with theatrical precision. By my calculations, we have about 20 minutes before the fire reaches this spot. Plenty of time for you and your four-legged friend to have a tragic accident in the smoke. Ranger's growl was getting louder, and I could feel his muscles tensing beneath his scarred coat. Despite his blindness, despite years of abuse and abandonment, he was preparing to protect me the same way he'd once tried to protect Emma. The beauty of wildfire, Harry continued, is that it destroys evidence so completely. Bodies are reduced to ash. Metal melts beyond recognition, and any inconvenient questions are literally consumed by flames. Very convenient for someone in my position. "You won't get away with this," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Clay Morrison knows I have the evidence. When I don't come back, Clay Morrison thinks you're a confused old woman seeing things that aren't there. When they find your remains in the fire zone, they'll assume you got disoriented during the evacuation and wandered off. Happens to elderly folks all the time during emergencies." The flames were getting closer now, and the smoke was becoming thick enough to make breathing difficult. I could hear the fire consuming the dry underbrush, crackling and roaring like a living thing. In a few minutes, this entire section of forest would be an inferno. But as I looked down at Ranger, standing protectively beside me despite everything he'd suffered, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Not hope, exactly, but a kind of fierce determination that reminded me why I'd become a nurse, why I'd spent 40 years fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Emma had died trying to save this dog. The least I could do was return the favor. "You made one mistake, Harry," I said, clutching the evidence case to my chest. "You assumed I came out here alone." His confident expression flickered for just a moment. "What do you mean?" I smiled, thinking of the 911 call I'd made before leaving my apartment. The GPS tracker in my emergency medical alert bracelet, and the fact that Clay Morrison was a better man than Harry gave him credit for. "I mean, you're about to find out why folks around here don't mess with old ladies who've got nothing left to lose." The truth was, I'd been bluffing about the 911 call, but my medical alert bracelet did have GPS tracking, one of those newfangled gadgets my daughter insisted I wear after Emma died. What I hadn't counted on was the sound of engines approaching through the forest, growing louder by the minute. Harry's head snapped toward the noise, his confident facade cracking like old paint. "What the hell?" "That'll be the cavalry," I said, though honestly I had no idea who was coming. "Told you that you made a mistake." The first ATV burst through the smoke screen like something out of an action movie, with Clay Morrison at the controls and a young firefighter I didn't recognize riding behind him. 2 more ATVs followed, carrying members of the volunteer fire department and what looked like half the sheriff's office. Harry swung his gun toward the approaching vehicles, but Ranger chose that moment to make his move. Despite being blind, that brave dog launched himself at Harry with the precision of a guided missile, his 100 pounds of muscle and determination knocking the gun from Harry's hand and sending him sprawling into the underbrush. "Get the weapon!" Clay shouted as he leaped off his ATV. "Mrs. Thompson, are you hurt?" "Fine as frog's hair," I called back, though my knees were shaking so bad I could barely stand. "But you need to see what's in this case. Harry Blackstone's been setting fires all over the county for years, and he killed my granddaughter to cover it up." Harry was struggling to get back on his feet, his expensive shirt torn and his face bloodied from Ranger's attack. "This is ridiculous," he gasped. "That woman is clearly suffering from dementia. She's been wandering around in the smoke, making up wild stories about a dog that doesn't even—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Ranger standing protectively beside me, those clouded eyes fixed on him with unmistakable recognition. "Jesus Christ," whispered one of the firefighters. "That dog's been missing for years. We all thought he was dead." "He was supposed to be," Harry snarled, abandoning all pretense of innocence. "Worthless animal, wouldn't follow orders. Cost me thousands in training. Then refused to perform when it mattered." Clay was examining the contents of the document case, his expression growing darker with each piece of evidence. Fire-starting equipment, insurance policies, photographs of crime scenes. He looked up at Harry with disgust. How many people died in these fires? None that couldn't be replaced. Harry replied, his mask slipping completely. This county was dying anyway, bunch of poor farmers and old folks clinging to worthless land. I was doing everyone a favor by clearing it for proper development. The casual way he dismissed human life made my stomach turn. This wasn't just a criminal, this was a monster who saw people as obstacles to be removed. The Peterson family, Clay said, reading from one of the documents. 5 people died in that house fire. Maria Peterson was pregnant. Unfortunate, but unavoidable. They refused 3 generous offers for their property. The Miller cabin. Elderly couple burned to death in their sleep. Also regrettable. But they were in their 80s. How much longer did they really have? Each admission hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. These weren't just statistics to us. These were our neighbors, our friends, our community members whose deaths we'd mourned as tragic accidents. And Emma, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What about my granddaughter? Harry's smile was pure evil. Your granddaughter was a complication that needed to be resolved. She saw too much, asked too many questions. 7-year-old children shouldn't interfere with adult business. That was when Clay Morrison, professional firefighter and pillar of the community, hauled off and punched Harry Blackstone square in the mouth. "Clay," I said, though secretly I was cheering. "Sorry, Mrs. Thompson," Clay replied, shaking his knuckles. But some things require direct action. The wind was picking up now, pushing the main fire closer to our location. Through the thickening smoke, I could see orange flames dancing between the trees, consuming everything in their path. We had maybe 10 minutes before this entire area would be an inferno. "We need to get out of here," one of the firefighters said. "This whole section's going to go up." But as they prepared to evacuate, Harry made one last desperate play. "You fools don't understand," he shouted as they loaded him onto one of the ATVs. "I own half the property in this county. My lawyers will have me out before you finish the paperwork, and when I get out, I'll finish what I started with the fire, with that animal, and with any of you who think you can stand in my way." That's when the wind shifted, and I smelled something that made my blood freeze. Not just smoke from burning trees, but the distinctive odor of gasoline and chemical accelerants. "Clay," I said urgently, "he's got more fires set. That's not just wildfire smell." Clay's radio crackled to life. "Chief Morrison, we've got multiple new fire starts reported, one at the elementary school, one at the medical clinic, and 3 more in residential areas. They're not connected to the main fire. Looks like they were set deliberately." Harry's laughter cut through the noise of engines and radio chatter. "Time-delayed incendiary devices," he said proudly, "set to activate during the evacuation, when everyone's distracted. By the time you put out one fire, 3 more will have started. Pine Ridge is going to burn tonight, and there's nothing any of you can do to stop it." The scope of his plan was staggering. While everyone was focused on the wildfire approaching from the mountains, Harry had sabotaged the town itself, turning the evacuation into a trap that would destroy everything and everyone who couldn't escape in time. "The retirement community," I gasped. "All those old folks who can't move fast." "Already accounted for," Harry said with satisfaction. Amazing how much damage a few well-placed devices can do to a building full of people who need walkers and oxygen tanks. Clay was already on his radio, coordinating emergency response teams. But I could see the desperation in his eyes. Pine Ridge's volunteer fire department wasn't equipped to handle multiple simultaneous fires while also evacuating hundreds of residents. That's when Ranger did something that took my breath away. The dog walked deliberately to the ATV where Harry was restrained, looked directly at him with those clouded eyes, then turned and began walking purposefully toward the town, not randomly, not frantically, but with the same focused determination I'd seen when he rescued those children from the smoke. "He knows where the devices are," I said suddenly. "Harry trained him to place them. Ranger knows every location." Clay caught on immediately. "Can he lead us to them?" Guide dogs remember routes, even years later. It's what they're trained for. I looked down at Ranger, who had stopped and was looking back at us expectantly. He's been trying to help all along. When he dug up that evidence case, when he led those children to safety, he's been fighting back the only way he knows how. "Mrs. Thompson," Clay said urgently, "I know this is a lot to ask, but we need someone he trusts to guide him." "The evacuation deadline is in 30 hours, but with these new fires—" "We don't have 30 hours," I interrupted. "If those devices are timed to go off in sequence, we've got maybe 2 hours before the whole town is an inferno." The wind was howling now, carrying sparks and burning debris in all directions. Through the smoke, I could see the glow of fires spreading across Pine Ridge like a deadly constellation. "I'm 72 years old with arthritis and a heart condition," I told Clay. "But I'll be damned if I'm going to let that monster destroy my town and kill my neighbors." I looked down at Ranger, who was waiting patiently for my decision. "Come on, boy. Let's go save some lives." As we loaded onto the ATVs for the race back to Pine Ridge, I couldn't help thinking that Emma would be proud of both of us. We were finally doing what she'd tried to do 3 years ago, standing up to evil, protecting the innocent and refusing to let fear win. The difference was, this time we weren't alone. The ride back to Pine Ridge was like racing through hell itself. Smoke billowed across the road in thick black clouds, and orange flames danced between the trees on both sides of the highway. But the worst part was seeing the new fires Harry had set throughout the town, bright spots of destruction blooming like deadly flowers against the twilight sky. Ranger rode beside me on Clay's ATV, his nose working constantly as he processed scents that were invisible to the rest of us. Every few minutes, he'd tense and point his muzzle toward a specific direction, and Clay would radio the information to the fire crews scattered throughout Pine Ridge. "He's found 3 devices so far," Clay shouted over the engine noise. "If we can trust his nose, we might actually have a chance." But as we crested the hill overlooking downtown Pine Ridge, my heart nearly stopped. The elementary school was fully engulfed in flames, and smoke was pouring from the medical clinic where most of our elderly residents got their care. Worse yet, I could see people, dozens of them, still trying to evacuate from the Autumn Creek retirement community. "Dear Lord," I whispered. "We're too late." That's when Ranger did something that made my blood run cold. He looked directly at me with those clouded eyes, then threw back his head and let out a howl that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. It wasn't just a sound, it was pure anguish, the cry of an animal who understood exactly what was happening and felt powerless to stop it. "He knows," I said to Clay. "He knows Harry's plan is working." But then something remarkable happened. From all over Pine Ridge, other dogs began answering Ranger's call. First one bark, then another, then a chorus of canine voices rising above the roar of flames and sirens. Pet dogs, farm dogs, strays, every four-legged resident of Pine Ridge seemed to understand that something was desperately wrong. "Mrs. Thompson," Clay said urgently, "I need you to make a choice. We can either take Ranger to help locate the remaining devices, or we can go directly to Autumn Creek and help with the evacuation. But we can't do both. There isn't time." I looked at the retirement community, where I could see wheelchairs and walkers silhouetted against the flames, then down at Ranger, who was trembling with the effort of processing all the smoke and chemical smells filling the air. "How many devices are still out there?" I asked. "Based on what we've found so far, maybe 6 or 7. If they're all timed to go off..." Clay checked his watch. "We've got maybe 90 minutes before this whole town becomes uninhabitable. 90 minutes to save a community. 90 minutes to stop a madman's plan. 90 minutes to prove that good could triumph over evil, even when the odds seemed impossible." "Autumn Creek," I said without hesitation. "Those folks can't save themselves, but the fire department can handle the devices if Ranger shows you where to look first." Clay nodded grimly. "Ranger, boy, we need you to work fast. Can you show us where the bad things are hidden?" The dog's response was immediate and heartbreaking. He began moving through downtown Pine Ridge with desperate efficiency, leading us from location to location with the precision of a military operation. Behind the post office, an incendiary device wired to a timer. Under the wooden steps of the library, another one, set to activate in 40 minutes. In the storm drain behind Murphy's Hardware, a third device surrounded by accelerant-soaked rags. Each discovery was both a victory and a reminder of how close we'd come to losing everything. Harry Blackstone hadn't just planned to burn Pine Ridge. He'd designed a systematic destruction that would have left nothing but ash and memories. "Son of a bitch was thorough," muttered one of the firefighters as he disarmed the device behind the hardware store. "These are sophisticated setups, military-grade timers, professional quality accelerants. This wasn't some amateur operation." But as we worked our way through Harry's planned destruction, I began to notice something that chilled me to the bone. Ranger wasn't just finding the devices, he was remembering them. His body language told the story, ears pinned back with shame, tail tucked low, movements careful and guilty. This dog had been forced to place these death traps. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered, kneeling beside him as Clay's team disarmed another device. "He made you do this, didn't he? He beat you until you were so scared you'd do anything he asked." Ranger pressed his massive head against my shoulder, and I could feel him shaking, not from cold or excitement, but from the trauma of reliving the worst experiences of his life. Every device we found was a reminder of his forced participation in Harry's crimes, another weight on a conscience that had already carried too much guilt. That's when the horror really hit me. "Clay," I said, my voice barely audible above the chaos around us. "Emma didn't just see Harry abusing Ranger. She saw him forcing the dog to practice placing these devices. That's why she tried to intervene." Clay's face went white as he understood the implications. "You mean She died trying to stop a 7-year-old's version of a terrorist attack. She saw Harry teaching Ranger to plant bombs, and she tried to save the dog and warn people at the same time. The scope of my granddaughter's courage was staggering. A 7-year-old child had recognized evil and tried to fight it, even when the adults around her were blind to the danger. She'd died protecting not just an animal, but an entire community that didn't even know it was under threat. "Mrs. Thompson," Clay said gently, "we need to get to Autumn Creek. The wind's shifting, and those folks are running out of time." As we raced toward the retirement community, I could see the full scope of the disaster unfolding. The main wildfire had reached the outskirts of Pine Ridge, merging with Harry's deliberately set blazes to create a wall of flame that seemed to stretch from horizon to horizon. Evacuation vehicles were streaming out of town, but too many people were still trapped in buildings that hadn't been cleared. Autumn Creek was chaos. Elderly residents sat in wheelchairs on the parking lot, clutching photo albums and prescription bottles, while overwhelmed staff members tried to account for everyone. But smoke was pouring from the building's east wing, and I could hear Mrs. Henderson from 4B screaming for help from a second-floor window. "The elevator's out," one of the staff members told Clay frantically. "We can't get the wheelchair-bound residents down the stairs fast enough, and the smoke's getting thicker by the minute." That's when Ranger made a decision that took my breath away. Without any command from me or Clay, he walked directly into the smoke-filled building. His clouded eyes might not have been able to see, but his nose could track people through conditions that would blind and disorient any human rescuer. "Ranger!" "No," I called after him, but it was too late. The dog had disappeared into the building with the same purposeful determination he'd shown when saving those children in the morning. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The smoke was getting so thick that even the firefighters were having trouble seeing inside the building. Then, through the haze, I saw him. Ranger emerged from the stairwell leading an elderly man I recognized as Mr. Patterson from 3A. The dog had somehow convinced a man with severe dementia to follow him down 2 flights of stairs through smoke so thick it would have confused a sighted person. But he didn't stop there. Again and again, Ranger disappeared into that burning building and emerged with another resident, Mrs. Chen from the second floor, who spoke almost no English but somehow understood the dog's guidance. The Williamson twins from 4C, both using walkers and moving slower than molasses, but trusting this blind animal to lead them to safety. "How is he doing this?" one of the firefighters asked in amazement. "I can barely see 3 feet in that smoke, and he's navigating like he's got a map." "He's been trained for this," I realized suddenly. Not just as a guide dog, but as a search and rescue animal. Harry must have put him through specialized training before he tried to corrupt him for arson. Each rescue was a small miracle, but I could see that Ranger was paying a terrible price. His breathing was becoming labored from smoke inhalation. His movements were getting slower, and his beautiful coat was singed in several places. But he kept going back. He kept saving lives. The last person he brought out was Mrs. Henderson from 4B, a 93-year-old woman who weighed maybe 80 pounds soaking wet. Ranger had somehow gotten her down 2 flights of stairs and across a smoke-filled lobby, then collapsed the moment he delivered her to the paramedics. "Get the oxygen mask on him," Clay ordered. "This dog's a hero." As I knelt beside Ranger in the parking lot, watching the paramedics work to clear the smoke from his lungs, I finally understood what Emma had seen in this magnificent animal 3 years ago. Not just intelligence or loyalty, but a soul that couldn't be broken, even by the worst cruelty humans could inflict. Harry Blackstone had tried to turn Ranger into an instrument of destruction. Instead, he'd created the most courageous rescuer Pine Ridge had ever seen. The oxygen mask over Ranger's muzzle fogged with each labored breath as the paramedics worked to clear the smoke from his lungs. I sat beside him in the evacuation staging area, stroking his singed coat and whispering reassurances while chaos swirled around us. But even as I watched him fight for every breath, my mind was racing with a horrible realization. "Clay," I said urgently, grabbing the fire chief's sleeve as he coordinated the final evacuations. "We're missing someone. Harry said he had devices at multiple locations, but we've only found the ones in town. What about his property? What about Sycamore Hill?" Clay's face went pale. Jesus. His mansion's got a clear view of the whole valley. If he's got accelerants stored up there... "It's not just about accelerants," I interrupted, pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. "Remember what he said about eliminating witnesses, Clay? I don't think Emma was his only victim." The thought had been nagging at me since Harry's confession in the woods, but now, with Ranger's breathing slowly stabilizing and my mind clearing from the immediate crisis, I could see the pattern. A wealthy man with unlimited resources, an isolated mansion on a hilltop, and a systematic plan to eliminate anyone who threatened his schemes. "His wife," I whispered. "Margaret Blackstone. When did you last see her in town?" Clay frowned, thinking. "Has to be at least 2 years, maybe 3. Harry always said she was traveling, visiting family back east. For 3 years, without coming home once." I shook my head. "Clay, what if she didn't leave? What if she found out about the arsons, the insurance fraud, and Harry had to silence her?" Before Clay could respond, Ranger lifted his head from the oxygen mask, his clouded eyes suddenly alert and focused. Despite his exhaustion and smoke inhalation, he was picking up a scent that made his whole body tense with urgency. "What is it, boy?" I asked, following his gaze toward the hillside where Harry's mansion sat like a dark monument against the firelit sky. Ranger struggled to his feet, shaking off the paramedic who tried to keep the oxygen mask in place. He was moving with purpose again. But this time there was something different about his demeanor. Not the efficient determination of a working dog, but something more personal, more desperate. "He wants to go up there," I realized. "To Harry's house." "Mrs. Thompson, that's crazy," Clay said. "The main fire's moving that direction. And if Harry's got accelerants stored up there, the whole place could go up any minute." But Ranger was already walking toward the road that led up Sycamore Hill, pausing every few steps to look back at us with an expression that was heartbreakingly human. He was asking no, begging us to follow him. "There's someone up there," I said with sudden certainty. "Someone who needs help." Clay checked his watch. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before the fire reaches that area. If we're going to do this, it has to be now." The ride up to Harry's mansion was like ascending into Dante's Inferno. The wind was howling down the mountainside, carrying sparks and burning debris that turned the sky into a kaleidoscope of orange and red. But Ranger sat alertly beside me, his nose working constantly as we climbed the winding road toward the hilltop estate. Harry's mansion was even more imposing up close, a sprawling Tudor-style structure with multiple wings, manicured grounds, and enough security lights to illuminate a small airport. But tonight, those lights flickered ominously as the power grid struggled under the strain of the crisis, and smoke was beginning to drift across the carefully maintained gardens. "Where are we looking?" Clay asked as we approached the front door. Ranger answered by walking directly past the main entrance and around the side of the house. He moved with the confidence of familiarity, leading us through a gate in the garden wall and toward what looked like a groundskeeper's cottage set apart from the main building. But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't a cottage at all. It was a bunker. The structure was built into the hillside, with thick concrete walls and only one visible entrance, a heavy steel door that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. No windows, no ventilation that I could see, and a series of heavy-duty locks that would have challenged a professional locksmith. "What the hell is this place?" Clay muttered, examining the door. Ranger was pawing frantically at the steel surface, whining with an urgency that made my heart race. He was trying to dig through solid metal, his claws scraping uselessly against the impenetrable barrier. "Someone's in there," I said. "Someone he cares about." That's when we heard it, faint, barely audible over the wind and distant sirens, but unmistakably human. A voice calling for help from somewhere inside the bunker. "Margaret Blackstone," Clay breathed. "She's alive." The locks on the door were electronic, controlled by a keypad that blinked red with each failed attempt at entry. But Ranger had stopped pawing at the door and was instead moving systematically around the perimeter of the bunker. His nose pressed close to the ground. He stopped beside what looked like an air vent, partially concealed by overgrown bushes. When I knelt beside him, I could hear the voice more clearly, a woman's voice, weak and desperate. "Help me," she was saying. "Please. Someone help me. I've been here so long." "Mrs. Blackstone," I called through the vent. "Can you hear me? This is Abigail Thompson from town." "Abigail." The voice was stronger now, filled with desperate hope. "Oh, God. Is it really you? I thought I was going to die down here." "How long have you been imprisoned?" Clay asked, his voice tight with anger. 3 years, came the broken reply. "Ever since I found out about the fires. Harry caught me calling the police about the Peterson house. He said I was going to ruin everything, that I didn't understand the bigger picture. 3 years. The same time Emma died. The same time Ranger disappeared. Harry hadn't just committed murder that summer, he'd embarked on a reign of terror that had destroyed multiple lives. "Mrs. Blackstone, we're going to get you out," Clay promised. "But we need to know, are there explosives down there? Anything that might make the bunker dangerous?" "Food storage, water, a generator," she replied. "Harry built this as some kind of survival shelter. But there's no way out from the inside. The door only opens with his fingerprint or a code I don't know." Clay was already on his radio, calling for specialized equipment to breach the bunker door. But as I listened to the wind howling around us and saw the orange glow on the horizon growing brighter, I knew we were running out of time. "The fire's going to be here in 15 minutes, Clay said grimly. "Even if we can get through that door, we might not be able to evacuate safely." That's when Ranger did something that took my breath away. He walked back to the air vent, lay down with his muzzle pressed against the opening, and began to howl. Not the desperate cry he'd made earlier, but something different, something that sounded almost like communication. And from inside the bunker, I heard Margaret Blackstone begin to laugh. "Baron," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Oh my God. Is that Baron? I thought Harry killed you." Ranger's tail was wagging now, his whole body vibrating with excitement. This wasn't just about rescuing a stranger, this was about saving someone he loved. Someone who had shown him kindness during the darkest period of his life. "Mrs. Blackstone," I called through the vent. "Ranger's been looking for you. He never forgot." "He used to visit me," she explained, her voice thick with emotion. Before Harry blinded him, before everything went wrong, Baron would come to the bunker when Harry was working late, and I'd feed him treats through this vent. He was the only friend I had after Harry started planning his horrible schemes. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Ranger hadn't just witnessed Emma's murder, he'd been trying to lead her to Margaret Blackstone, trying to save both the people he loved most. And when Harry discovered what he was doing, he'd punished the dog by taking away his sight and leaving him for dead. But Ranger had survived. And now, 3 years later, he was finally going to complete the rescue mission that had cost him everything. "Hold on, Margaret," I called through the vent as Clay's equipment arrived. "We're coming for you." The sound of metal cutting through steel filled the air as Clay's emergency crew worked frantically to breach the bunker door. Sparks flew in all directions, and the acrid smell of burning metal mixed with the smoke from the approaching wildfire. Through it all, Ranger lay pressed against the air vent, maintaining contact with Margaret Blackstone as if his presence alone could keep her alive for a few more precious minutes. "Almost through," Clay shouted over the noise of the cutting tools. "Maybe 5 more minutes." But 5 minutes was time we didn't have. The main fire had crested the ridge behind Harry's mansion, and burning embers were already falling like deadly snow across the manicured grounds. The wind was pushing the flames directly toward us, and I could feel the temperature rising with each passing second. "Mrs. Blackstone," I called through the vent. "We're almost there. Just hold on a little longer." "I can smell smoke," came her weak reply. "Is the fire coming this way?" I exchanged a worried glance with Clay. No point in lying, she'd know the truth soon enough. "Yes, but we're going to get you out in time. I promise." The cutting equipment finally broke through the last of the steel reinforcement, and the massive door swung open with a groan that sounded like the gates of hell themselves. Clay shone his flashlight into the darkness beyond, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into what looked like a concrete tomb. "Margaret," he called. "Where are you?" "Here," came the reply from somewhere in the depths. "I'm here." Ranger didn't wait for permission. The moment the door opened, he bounded down those stairs with more energy than I'd seen from him all day. His clouded eyes might not have been able to see, but his nose and his heart guided him straight to the woman who had shown him kindness when the rest of his world was cruelty. Clay and I followed as quickly as we could, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness of Harry's underground prison. The bunker was larger than I'd expected, a series of connected rooms stocked with enough food and water to last months. But it was also clearly designed as a jail, with reinforced walls and no possible means of escape. We found Margaret Blackstone in the furthest room, sitting on a narrow cot with Ranger pressed against her side. She was painfully thin, her once beautiful blonde hair now streaked with gray, and her clothes hung loosely on a frame that spoke of years of inadequate nutrition. But her eyes, those same intelligent blue eyes I remembered from church socials and charity events, were bright with tears of joy. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered to Ranger, burying her face in his scarred fur. "I knew you wouldn't forget me." The reunion was heartbreaking and beautiful at the same time. This woman had survived 3 years of imprisonment, sustained by nothing but hope and the memory of a dog's friendship. And Ranger brave. Loyal Ranger had survived torture and abandonment, driven by the need to complete a rescue mission that had begun the day Emma died. "Can you walk?" Clay asked gently, kneeling beside Margaret. "I think so," she replied, though her voice was shaky. "I've been doing exercises to stay strong, hoping someday." She trailed off, looking around the bunker that had been her prison. "Is Harry in custody?" I assured her. "He won't hurt anyone ever again." As we helped Margaret to her feet, I could hear the fire growing closer outside. The bunker's concrete construction might protect us from the flames temporarily, but the air vents would quickly fill with smoke, and the temperature would become unbearable long before the fire passed. "We need to move," Clay said urgently. "The fire's almost on top of us." But when we reached the stairs leading back to the surface, Margaret stopped suddenly. "Wait," she said, her voice stronger now. "There's something you need to know. Something I've been keeping secret for 3 years. Clay and I exchanged glances. We really didn't have time for revelations, but the look in Margaret's eyes suggested this was important. "Harry didn't just kill your granddaughter to hide his arson schemes," she continued, looking directly at me. "Emma found out about me. She came here that day looking for Baron, and she heard me calling for help through the vent." My heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "She tried to help me escape. That brave little girl spent an hour trying to figure out how to open the bunker door. When Harry found her here, she wasn't just trying to save Baron from abuse, she was trying to save me from being murdered." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Emma hadn't died because she witnessed dog training or even arson preparation. She'd died because she'd discovered that Harry Blackstone was holding his own wife prisoner, and she'd tried to rescue her. She told Harry she was going to tell everyone about the lady in the underground house. Margaret continued, tears streaming down her face. She said it wasn't right to keep someone locked up, that families were supposed to take care of each other. 7 years old, and Emma had understood something about morality and justice that most adults never grasp. She'd seen injustice and tried to fix it, even when the cost was her own life. "I'm so sorry," Margaret whispered. "If I hadn't called for help, if I'd stayed quiet when she found me—" "No," I said firmly, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Emma did what was right. She died trying to save you, just like she died trying to save Ranger. That little girl had more courage in her tiny body than most people have in their entire lives." The smoke was getting thicker now, seeping down through the bunker's ventilation system and making breathing difficult. We had to leave immediately or risk being trapped underground. "Come on," Clay said, taking Margaret's arm. "We can finish this conversation once we're safe." The journey back to the surface felt like climbing out of our own graves. The air outside was thick with smoke and flying embers, and the heat was so intense it felt like standing too close to an oven. Harry's mansion was fully engulfed now, flames shooting from every window and roofing materials falling like burning rain. But Clay's evacuation vehicles were still there, engines running and ready to race us down the hillside to safety. As we loaded Margaret into the back of an ambulance, I realized that Ranger was missing. "Where's the dog?" I asked frantically, scanning the chaos around us. Clay pointed toward the burning mansion. "He went that way, just after we got Mrs. Blackstone into the ambulance." Through the smoke and flames, I could see Ranger's silhouette moving purposefully toward the house. Even now, even after everything he'd endured and accomplished, he was still trying to help. "Ranger," I called, my voice breaking. "Come back." But the dog didn't hesitate. He disappeared into the wall of fire that had once been Harry Blackstone's symbol of wealth and power. "We can't wait," Clay said gently, his hand on my shoulder. "The whole hillside's going to go up in the next few minutes." As we raced down Sycamore Hill ahead of the advancing flames, I pressed my face against the ambulance window and watched Harry's mansion burn. Somewhere in that inferno was the bravest, most loyal dog I'd ever known, still fighting the good fight even when victory seemed impossible. But then, just as we reached the bottom of the hill, I saw something that made my heart soar. A dark shape emerged from the smoke, moving slowly but steadily away from the burning mansion. Ranger, his coat singed but his spirit unbroken, was carrying something carefully in his mouth, a small metal box. Another piece of evidence, probably containing records of Harry's crimes that the monster had tried to destroy in the fire. Even in his final act of heroism, Ranger was still working to ensure that justice would be served. "Stop the ambulance," I told the paramedic. "We've got one more passenger to pick up." As Clay's team helped the exhausted dog into the vehicle, Margaret Blackstone reached out with shaking hands to touch his scarred muzzle. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for never giving up." Ranger's tail gave one weak wag, and then he collapsed into the sleep of the truly victorious. Outside, Pine Ridge was saved, the fires were contained, the community was safe, and justice was finally within reach. And in the back of that ambulance, 3 survivors, a widow, a prisoner, and a blind dog began the long journey toward healing. "Well," I said to no one in particular, watching the sunrise paint the sky pink above our rescued town, "I reckon that's what you call teamwork." Margaret laughed, the first genuine laughter she'd experienced in 3 years. "Abigail Thompson," she said, "you haven't changed a bit." "No, ma'am," I replied, scratching behind Ranger's ears as he slept peacefully between us. "I reckon some things are too important to change." As the ambulance carried us toward the medical center and whatever came next, I thought about Emma and how proud she would be of the dog she'd tried to save. In the end, Ranger had honored her sacrifice by becoming exactly what she'd always believed he could be, a hero worthy of a 7-year-old's trust. And sometimes, that's the greatest victory of all. Sometimes the greatest heroes walk on 4 legs and see with their hearts instead of their eyes. This story reminds us that in a world that often dismisses the wisdom of our years, sometimes it takes an old woman's persistence and a blind dog's courage to reveal the truth that younger eyes have missed. Abigail Thompson knew what she saw, even when everyone else called her confused. She trusted her instincts when society told her to sit quietly and let others handle things. At 72, she proved that age doesn't diminish our capacity for justice, it sharpens it. Ranger showed us that no matter how broken we feel, no matter what cruelty we've endured, we still have something valuable to offer the world. Like many of us who've weathered life's storms, he carried scars that told a story of survival, not defeat. Together, an elderly woman and a damaged dog saved an entire community, because they refused to believe that their best days were behind them. Their bond reminds us that wisdom, compassion, and courage don't fade with age, they deepen. In a society that often overlooks our generation, this story whispers a powerful truth: we still matter, we're still needed, and our love still has the power to change lives.